Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to never miss any update from Rouse IAS Study Circle. Join the only official Telegram channel of Rouse IAS Study Circle to get the relevant materials and important updates. Hello and welcome to the Daily News Simplified, the what, why, and how of the newspaper analysis from the Civil Services Examinations perspective. In today's session, we will discuss The Hindu Delhi edition dated 19 December 2021 and some important articles of the Indian Express Explained section from the last week. The topics to be discussed have been displayed on your screen and the timestamping of the same has been provided in the description box below. So moving on to our first topic that has appeared in Indian Express Explained section, and this topic is related to the parvovirus. This topic has come in the context that nearly 2,000 pet and stray dogs in the city of Amravati were affected by the canine parvovirus. And therefore, several veterinary doctors have cautioned the pet owners against this severe outbreak. Now, this topic is important from the UPSC prelims point of view because in the prelims syllabus we have a section of general science, and that is why you need to be aware about the basics of this particular virus also. Now, this is highly contagious viral disease which has a life-threatening impacts on dogs. These dogs can be adults as well as puppies. And they are such life-threatening that the mortality rate among these animals because of this particular virus is around 90%, and that is why more than 2,000 of dogs have died in the city of Amravati. Now, this particular virus also has its relation with the COVID-19 pandemic. The point is that this virus is not biologically related to the COVID virus, but the issue was that because of the COVID induced lockdown, the pet owners didn't take their dogs to receive the regular vaccines. And because the dogs didn't receive the vaccine, their immunity was very low, and that is why they became susceptible to this particular virus. Now, the important thing about this virus is that it affects the intestinal tracts of the dogs. And once the intestine has been affected, the symptoms, the impacts of this particular virus is bloody diarrhea, vomiting, drastic weight loss, dehydration, and lethargy among the dogs. Now let us understand the life cycle of the canine parvovirus. Suppose this is the dog, and the dog becomes infected by this parvovirus, and therefore the dog becomes the carrier. Now, when this dog excretes his or her excreta in the public place, that excreta contains the virus in that particular material. And when some other dog comes there and he or she smells that particular feces, the dog injects the virus through the oronasal route. And once the virus has entered the body of this particular dog, the virus multiplies in huge numbers and directly impact the intestine of that particular dog. And even here you can see when the parvovirus attack the intestine, the guts are impacted and these guts become damaged. So under this particular life cycle, we have understood that the direct contact with the infected dog infects the other dogs also. But the direct contact is not always required because the indirect contact with the contaminated object can also do its job. For example, this particular person comes in contact with the dog 1 who has a parvovirus in his body. This virus will be transferred to this man, and when he'll come in contact with this particular dog, the man will transfer the virus to this dog also. So that is why when the infected person touches the puppy can be affected due to this parvovirus. Further, the dogs can also get affected in encountering the contaminated objects like food, water bowls, collars, and leashes. So, the important point to be remembered from the examination point of view is that this virus spreads through both the ways, that is, the direct way and the indirect way. The important point to be remembered here is that parvovirus has no cure, and inoculating a puppy or a dog gives them a fighting chance against the infection. That means the dogs can only fight if their immune system is strong enough, they'll be successful, but there is no cure for the parvovirus. However, there are some preventive strategies like vaccination which can reduce the possibility of the risk of this parvovirus to our pets. That is, initially the vaccine, the first dosage is given at 45 days and the second dose is given after 21 days after the first dose. And it is said that to properly protect the canines, it is necessary to administer the vaccine to them while they are puppies and then continue to do the same every year. So, summing up the entire topic in brief once again, this topic has appeared in the context of the Amravati city because more than 2000 dogs have been affected in that particular city because of the parvovirus. Here we understood about the basics of the parvovirus, that it is a highly contagious viral disease and it is life threatening because the mortality rate is as high as 90%. This virus particularly infects the intestine of the dogs and they damage these gut areas. Further, because of the COVID 19 induced lockdown, the pet owners didn't take their dogs to the vaccine centers, and in the absence of the regular vaccines, these dogs got their immune system as reduced and therefore it affected them. Here we understand the direct life cycle of the canine parvovirus and how the second dog becomes infected because of the first dog's excreta. And then we understood that spreading of the virus is not just restricted to the direct contact, but there are indirect links also, and the humans can also transmit this virus to some other dogs. Further, these dogs can also encounter contaminated objects like food, water balls, collars, etc., and get infected. And in the last, we learned that parvovirus has no cure, and that is why the vaccination, the preventive strategies are the only solutions for them. And moreover, it is also to be noted that the vaccines are not just provided to the puppies, they have to be provided every year. So, moving on to our next topic that has appeared in the context of the state of Kerala, and this topic is related to the infrastructure build up in Kerala. Now, this topic contains a very important term that is Silver Line because the project named Silver Line is going on in the state of Kerala, and that is why we need to understand that what this particular project deals with and what are the associated issues. So, this topic has appeared in the context that protests are taking place across the Kerala against the Silver Line project. And this project is a semi high speed railway project that envisages trains running at 200 to 220 kilometers per hour and connecting the northernmost and the southernmost parts of the state of Kerala. And that is why this project has been built as one of the biggest infrastructure plans, estimated to cost around rupees 64,000 crore. So that is why this topic becomes important from the preliminary examination point of view because the UPSC scheme of syllabus mentions this particular section, the current events of national and international importance. So as you can see here, this is a map of state of Kerala, and the northernmost area is the Kasargod and the southernmost area is Tiruvananthapuram. So this particular project is going to connect Kasargod with Tiruvananthapuram. And the estimated line of this particular project is around 530 kilometers. The trains are going to run at the top speed of 220 km per hour. Now, presently, in the absence of this semi high speed trains, the general time taken to reach from this point to this point is 12 hours. But the experts say that once this project is fulfilled, this time of traveling will reduce from 12 hours to less than 4 hours. And that is why, in order to ensure fast and streamlined connectivity between both the corners, this project is aimed to be achieved and completed by 2025. Now, because this project is dealing with the railways, therefore, the state of Kerala and the central government both have joined hands together to ensure the streamlined fulfillment of this particular project. So, in this very regard, we need to understand the benefits associated with this particular project. The experts say that because of the rise in population, industrialization, and urbanization, there is a high rise of demand in the state of Kerala for these infrastructural projects. Because now the business class is increasing, now the youths have become more aspirational. That is why we need to have a streamlined connectivity between all the points of one state, country, or for that matter, throughout the world. And thus, in order to meet this particular demand, the project of Silver Line has been envisaged in the state of Kerala. And after meeting the demand, the other important factor which today's mobility is concerned with is the time factor. And that is why, in order to reduce this time, the semi high speed trains are envisioned. So, the important point is that not just only meeting the demand is concerned, taking into account the time factor is also important in designing any policy or program. Further, it is also known that once the rail projects are successful, they give us two important benefits. That is, they reduce the congestion on the roads, and that is why they further reduce the greenhouse gas emissions to tackle the global warming. Further, now we are into the age of multimodal connectivity, and that is why we need to integrate our transportation lines. Airports, roads, rails, IT corridors, we need to interconnect and integrate all these lines in order to fulfill the aspirations of the growing India. Further, it will also provide us the RoRo services. And the last important thing is that it will give a high boost to the employment generation in that particular region. But despite these benefits, there are certain issues also which has led to several protests. The first and the foremost point of argument against these projects is that this large infrastructure project is not in consonance with the environment of that particular region. Because this particular project will lead to deforestation, land use change, overloading of the underlying rocks, and these further can alter the drainage patterns, soil erosion and land degradation, slumping, and landslides. So that is why various environmental experts have raised their voice against this particular project. The second important reason for the protest is the financial aspect. Now, several experts have claimed that around 70,000 crore rupees are going to be spent on this particular project, which has several issues. Why not to spend that money on something like education, health, women, etc.? So, the point is that cost benefit ratio, according to those experts, is not in favor of this project, and that is why this huge financial burden will lead to debt on the state of Kerala and will push the Kerala in the debt cycle. Then the third important reason of protest is social angle. Because this particular project is believed to displace thousands of people already living in that particular area. It is estimated that around 30,000 people will be displaced, and this will uproot them from their original ancestral lands, and then they will be pushed to live in certain other areas which they are not familiar with, which in turn further can lead to social tensions in that particular host areas. So this huge scale displacement is not required for this particular project, and that is why government should come up with some sustainable alternatives which are in consonance with the environment and the social desirability of the state. Further, there are also apprehensions regarding some technical dimensions of the gauges which are being laid down for this rail line. Experts like Sridharan, who is also known as the Metro Man of India, he has challenged this project on the technical basis because, according to him, the gauge line, that is the width between the rails on which the trains run, is not technically sound. And the last important point is the economic in nature. Because of the huge land use change, the agricultural fields, especially the paddy fields, will be destroyed, and this can further reduce the agriculture related economy in the state of Kerala. So, summing up this entire topic in brief once again, this topic is related to the infrastructure project named Silver Line, which is being built in the state of Kerala to connect the north and the southmost corners of the state. Now, this particular project is related to the semi high speed railway project, which will run at a top speed of 220 kilometers per hour and will reduce the time traveling between Kasargod to Tiruvananthapuram to less than 4 hours. Then we learnt about the benefits associated with this particular project, which is expected to meet the growing demand of the aspirational Kerala. It will reduce the time traveling. Further, it will also reduce the congestion and greenhouse gas emissions because of the road transport, and this way it will lead to the integration of multiple transportation lines. Further, this project is because infrastructural in nature, this project is believed to generate huge employment activities. After these benefits, we learned about the reasons for the protests growing in the state of Kerala. These protests are on the environmental, financial, social, technical, and economic line of arguments. Our next topic is from The Hindu Sunday edition. Now, this topic is also very important because it is from the ecology and biodiversity point of view, and this topic gives us the details about one important species, that is gharials. And the topic reads that after 50 years, the gharials are alive and kicking in the Beas Reserve. Now, you must be aware about the Beas River in the state of Punjab. The issue was that the gharials have become extinct from this particular ecosystem few years back, but the dedicated efforts of the Forest Department and the state of Punjab have led to increase in the population number of the gharials in this particular ecosystem. And that is why, after successfully reintroducing the critically endangered gharials in the rivers of the Punjab where it went extinct half a century ago, the State Wildlife Preservation Wing is now keeping its fingers crossed, expecting the breeding of the crocodiles to start in the new few years. Now, from the examination point of view, we need to be aware about the certain key facts related to gharial. The common name, as we are calling again and again, is gharial, and its scientific name is the Gavialis gangeticus. And these are quite lengthy creatures because the full grown male can be as long as 6 meter and female can be as long as 4 meter. The weight of this particular species is around 150 to 250 kilogram, but the important fact of the matter is that the population of these gharials is estimated approximately to be around 800, and that is why it becomes critically endangered species of the IUCN Red List. Now, this particular point is very important, that gharials are critically endangered species because their population is hovering around just 800. And because of this sheer ecological importance and vulnerability of this species, it enjoys the protection under the Schedule 1 of the Wildlife Protection Act 1972 of India. Further, under CITES, it is listed in the Appendix 1. Now, if we closely analyze this particular map, this map shows the historical and the present range of the gharial species in the Indian subcontinent. These blue marks are the historical ranges of the gharials, and these were present in the Indo-Brahmaputra Gangetic system. And this was present in the Himalayan rivers ecosystem of the Indus, Ganga, and Brahmaputra. Further, they were also present in the river systems of the Southeast Asia, passing through the state of Myanmar. But if we talk about the present situation, the range of these gharials are very restricted in nature, and as you can see, these black spots, the gharials are restricted to this particular area. And here you can see that the Chambal River is the first and the primary ecosystem where the gharials survive. Then here, then here lies the Katarnia Ghat Sanctuary. This one is the Chitwan National Park, and this is in the Nepal. This we all know is the Son River of India, and this is the Satkosia Wildlife Sanctuary. Further, in state of Nepal, there are rivers like Karnali River which also have gharials present in them. Now, from here, one analytical point emerges that the gharials are the fresh water species because all the locations of the gharials are the rivers, and we know that rivers are the fresh waters. So, this you should remember, that the gharials are the species of the freshwater ecosystem. Further, in addition to gharials, we come across two very common species. The one is the mugger crocodile and the other is the saltwater crocodile. The IUCN status of the mugger crocodile is vulnerable, and the IUCN status of the saltwater crocodile is least concern. And we have discussed that gharials are critically endangered. So these three things must be remembered by you while solving the MCQs. Further, in comparison to the crocodiles, the gharials are very shy and unharmful species. Now, this important word is very relevant for you in real life. And it is said that the primary habitat, as we have discussed in this map also, is the Chambal River of India. and therefore the National Chambal Sanctuary, which is located along the river Chambal on the tri-junction of states of Rajasthan, MP and Uttar Pradesh, is known for this particular species. In addition to gharials, the National Chambal Sanctuary also houses some other important species like red-crowned roof turtle and the endangered Ganges river dolphin. Now, because the Ganga dolphin is also a freshwater species. So the Chambal rivers are the primary habitat, but the gharials here we discussed also have the secondary habitat. The rivers like Ghagra, Gandak, and Girva in the wildlife sanctuary of Katarnia Ghat in the state of UP, Ramganga River in Jim Corbett National Park, and the Son River in the peninsular India. So these are the important habitats of the gharial species. But now, as we have discussed, that the species have become critically endangered because they are facing several threats. Now, because gharials prefer sandbanks as a suitable habitats, the wild animals as well as humans often destroy their eggs. Further, increased river pollution, dam construction, massive scale fishing operations, and floods have also impacted their population, breeding, and distribution. And further, the anthropogenic activities like illegal sand mining and poaching have directly impacted and reduced the population of gharials. Now, summing up the entire topic in brief once again, the scientific name of gharials is the Gavialis gangetes, and they are quite lengthy creatures ranging around 4 to 6 meters depending upon whether the gharials are male or females. But they are listed in the Schedule 1 of the Wildlife Protection Act, and they are critically endangered species as per IUCN. Further, they are listed in Appendix 1 of the CITES because the population of gharials have come to as low as 800. Then, with the help of this particular map, we looked upon the distribution of gharials in the Indian subcontinent, its historical range, as well as the present locations. And in line with this, we also looked upon the IUCN status of the Magar crocodile and saltwater crocodile. And in the last, we came across the issues which are threatening the survival of this beautiful species in terms of anthropogenic activities like illegal sand mining, poaching, dam construction, pollution, floods, etc. Now, moving on to our next topic, that is in relation to the iron fortification and comes under the UPSC's prelims scheme of syllabus in the section of general science. Now, almost every year there are questions related to this particular section, and that is why we are taking up this important topic. Now, if you are reading the newspapers and watching the news, you must be aware about the recent initiatives taken by the government to boost the nutrition status of our children. And one of the very important steps to enhance the nutritional capacity of our children is the biofortification. So that is why in this session we will learn that what exactly do we mean by biofortification, what is iron fortification, what are its merits and what are its demerits. So first of all, we need to understand that what do we mean by food fortification. The food fortification is nothing just the increase and the addition of the vitamins and minerals in the already prepared food. These vitamins and minerals are added to this food during the stage of processing. Now, this particular point is very important because there is one another important term, that is biofortification, and many a times students confuse in between these two terms. There is a considerable and significant difference between the biofortification and food fortification. As we have discussed that in food fortification, the vitamins and minerals are added during the processing stage. In the biofortification, the seeds are bred in such a way that the crops which are going to be grown in the field, they have high nutritional value. Now this can be done either through selective breeding or through genetic modification. So that is why the biofortification is the process at the breeding stage and the food fortification is the process at the processing stage. And the governments and various civil society organizations are batting for this particular method because they are proven, they are safe, and they are cost effective strategy to tackle particularly with the phenomena of hidden hunger. Now, what do we exactly mean by hidden hunger? Hidden hunger is nothing but just the micronutrient deficiency in the human body. Because we are generally considered with the macronutrients like carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, we tend to ignore the micronutrients, for example, iron. Now, this is one of the most ignored micronutrient, but one of the highest needed micronutrient in the human body. And just to tackle with this particular challenge, the iron fortification is done as a means of food fortification. Now we understand that what is the exact role of iron and why the iron fortification is needed. The first and the foremost biological role of iron in the human body is that it is responsible for transportation of oxygen through hemoglobin in our body. The second important function is that iron is also responsible for the removal of the excess carbon dioxide from the human body and purify it. Further, it is also said that iron is one of the important micronutrients which are useful for the brain and the cognitive development of the child. Now we know that maximum cognitive development of a child takes place before the 5 years of age, and that is why it is said that pregnant women must be given with adequate iron rich diets so that the child born is not suffering from the deficiency of the iron in his or her initial years of life. But one of the biggest issues is that plant-based diets do not supply the adequate quantity of the iron required by the human body. Now, yes, there is a debate on this that what is the exact quantity which is required for the human body, but generally it is believed that the plant-based diets have certain deficiency in the iron quantity. And that is why, in order to tackle these challenges and reap the benefits of the iron, the government has come up with specific dedicated programs to increase the iron diets in Indians. The first important measure taken by the government is the National Iron Plus initiative, whereby two-pronged strategy is adopted. One is the supplementation, and other is the deworming. The second is the National Nutrition Anemia Control Program, whereby 6 cross 6 cross 6 strategy was adopted, and the pregnant women were the prime focus under this particular program. The third one is the Anemia Mukt Bharat, whereby the social awareness generation programs are pushed in order to make the people aware about the importance of iron and change their dietary habits in order to include iron more in quantity. And the third thing is that the government is also focusing on the children and they are including the iron rich diets in the integrated child development scheme. But again, as we say that excess of everything is bad, there are certain risks associated with the excess of iron rich diet also. The first and the important risk is that the excess of iron in human body leads to several non-communicable diseases like hypertension, diabetes and high cholesterol level. Further, the iron are also known to create oxidative stress and the excess of this can lead to life-threatening diseases like cancer. Then, from the social perspective, also it is said that because now you are promoting the mandatory diets, it goes against the freedom to eat and drink of one's choice. So, that is why few experts also say that mandatory iron rich diets are the imposition of the forced choices on the diets of the citizens. The next important issue is that there is no behavioral modification because supplementation cannot be long term until and unless the people are not aware, they do not change their behavior. These retrospective measures will not work in long run, and that is why no behavioral modification is done. We are just doing the cosmetic solutions for the problems which is deep rooted in our behavioral patterns. And the last issue is that over dependence on iron and ignoring the other micronutrients, for example, boron, magnesium, manganese, etc. So, therefore, we need to focus on the behavioral aspects more and make our citizens aware about the requirement of the iron. Along with this, research must be conducted in order to determine that what exact quantity of the iron is required in the human body in the India specific situations, because the dietary requirements vary across the genes, across the regions, depending upon the climate, habits, body structure, etc. So India specific studies must be conducted in order to determine the quality and the quantity of the iron required for the Indians. So now is the time for the question of the day. The question asked in yesterday's DNS was related to technical textiles. The question had two statements. The first one was India has emerged as the one of the largest manufacturer and the exporter of technical textiles. And statement 2 was National Technical Textile Mission has been launched to develop biodegradable technical textile materials only. You had to find the correct options, and both these statements are incorrect, and that is why the option D is the correct answer. The question from today's DNS is related to ghadials. You have to find the incorrect statements regarding ghadials. The statement 1 says that such species are highly adaptable and hence are found in fresh waters as well as saline waters. And statement 2 says that IUCN has categorized such species as critically endangered.